Hello, good afternoon. Peter Carson here. Welcome to our webinar on SharePoint 2019 and Extranet User Manager. I'm your guide for the next hour or so. Quick agenda of what we wanted to cover off this afternoon. We're going to start with a couple of introductions, and then we're going to dive right into some SharePoint 2019 announcements. So lots of news coming out of SharePoint conference last week, kind of taking the public wraps off of SharePoint 2019 and plans there. Then we're going to dive more into SharePoint On Premises extranets, why you'd want to do an extranet on your on-premise SharePoint, what would that look like? And we're going to speak more about our Extranet User Manager product, its features and licensing, and then wrap things up with some demos from there. So let me start out just quick introductions. As I mentioned, my name is Peter Carson. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager and Envision IT. I'm also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. Contact details are on the slide here. We're going to share the slide deck up on our website, and you'll get a follow-up email as well after the session. So all the details will begin there. On the line as well, Logan Guest is our sales person on Extranet User Manager. He's really your point person on any questions around licensing, trials, purchases, what have you from there. So that follow-up email with the recording and the slide deck will come from Logan, and feel free to reach out to him on any questions you may have around the product there. For those of you that aren't familiar with our Extranet User Manager product, I thought I'd start with a quick history. It actually goes back about a decade or so. We started building custom extranets on SharePoint in 2007 at the time, and sort of had a bespoke solution that we'd created for a number of different clients. About 6 years ago, we decided, you know what, we need to productize that, get it to a common code base across all those different client implementations, create an installer, and then a couple years ago added Office 365 support, but still kept very strong support for the on-premises SharePoint through all that. We launched it out as its own brand in 2015, added Azure B2B support to extend out the Office 365 side in 2016, launched our partner program last year, and this year we've launched out our version 4 of our Extranet User Manager, which is our latest version. The product's in use, clients across primarily North America, Europe, a little bit in Australia, Asia as well, so lots of different customers deployed out globally from there. All right, so let's dive right into the SharePoint 2019 announcement side of things. So both Logan and I had the pleasure of going down to Las Vegas a week before last for SharePoint Conference North America. Great conference, lots of Microsoft speakers there. Bill Bear, if you're not familiar with him, he's the Senior Product Marketing Manager for SharePoint. He tends to own the on-premises side of it and more the infrastructure side of the house as well. And he did a great session dedicated entirely to what's coming down the pipe from a SharePoint 2019 point of view. And this was kind of the first public announcements they'd made around what's in and what's out and what does that look like. So obviously it's built on the foundational release of SharePoint 2016, but it actually incorporates a lot of cloud components that happened since then. And that's really Microsoft's strategy going forward. They are very much a cloud-first organization, so they're always going to make their engineering investments on the cloud side, but they have a common code base between cloud and on-premise, so they basically fork it at a point in time and say, okay, let's take the version as of, say, a couple months ago from a SharePoint Online point of view, and use that as the basis going forward for what will become SharePoint 2019, and that's really been their approach there. You know, it's all about bringing customers closer to the cloud, a converged code base, as I mentioned, between on-premise and in the cloud. So probably the biggest news really is around the whole modern experience. So if you've been following what's been happening in the SharePoint Online point of view, modern team sites and modern communication sites are things that have come out in the last year or so. They really change up the user experience and ease of use of SharePoint. You know, the traditional page publishing model has kind of gone away completely from a modern communication site point of view. The lists and libraries, both from a communication and from a team site point of view, have completely been overhauled. And it's really about being mobile first, being much more user-friendly, much more intuitive to use from that point of view. So some of the key points out from that, the modern site creation process that you see in the online version, where they were striving for a sub 5-second new site creation process, which is way faster than what classic sites today get created in, is something that they're bringing to SharePoint 2019 as well. So you'll go through that same site creation process, have that same speed benefit from that point of view. Team News is a big part of both team sites and communication sites, so that's coming into on-premises. SharePoint Framework was already there from a I believe it was Discovery Pack 2 that brought in the SharePoint framework and extension side of things, so that's going to continue to be supported. Lots of interesting things happening from that point of view. So if you're doing any sort of custom development for SharePoint, if you're not into SharePoint framework, I strongly encourage you to dive into that. It's an extremely powerful and current way of doing client-side development, much nicer than app development in previous incarnations in SharePoint, and now applies to both SharePoint 2016, 2019, and online. So the investment that you make on premises is not lost if you move to the cloud in the future. One of the on-premise only features, which is pretty rare, I mean, pretty much everything we're seeing on premises already exists from a SharePoint Online point of view, is that you can actually make a communication site be your root site. You can't do that today in SharePoint Online. Basically, what we recommend to our clients is they create a redirect site at the root, going to, say, a /site/home site as your root site. 2019, you'll actually be able to do that to say, well, the top root of our site can be our corporate intranet, which traditionally you'd want to leverage things like the communication site framework to do that in. Now, you're going to have likely a lot of classic team sites in your existing environment if you're doing an upgrade into SharePoint 2019. That's not going to magically turn them into modern team sites. They're going to remain classic from an upgrade point of view. However, the lists and libraries will become modern interface even in classic sites from there. I've played too much around with this myself, but my understanding is you'd have the same experience as SharePoint Online, where it would default to the modern experience, but you'd have a link you could click to say, take me back to classic from there. Now, team sites in SharePoint Online are really a piece of a broader Office 365 groups concept. Now, obviously, from an on-premise point of view, we don't have the rest of the online suite to connect to from that point of view. So team sites are just team sites in SharePoint On-Premises 2019. They're not connected to Office 365 groups. And modern pages and the modern web parts, just like in online, are only available in the modern sites from there. So a couple things around the team sites and communication sites. The other big change is around the OneDrive side of the house. If you've been following what's been happening with the sync client, there was a lot of challenges with the OneDrive sync client over the years. It was still based on Groove technology that went back to 10 plus years ago. They did big push on the engineering side to replace that last year on the online side with the next generation sync client, which works way better. And the good news is that that's coming to the on-premise. So SharePoint 2019 will be fully supported by the next generation sync client. That'll give you files on demand, where you can basically see all of your files from SharePoint 2019, and then pick and choose which ones you want to download from there. It's much faster, it's much more reliable, and it's the same client for both cloud and on-premise. So if you're in a hybrid environment, you can use the same sync client and be syncing both from your on-premise and from your cloud SharePoint environments. Strong mobile support with the OneDrive client that can sync from both your personal OneDrive, OneDrive for Business, and your SharePoint libraries as well. And if you expose your SharePoint 2019 farm to the intranet, you'll get push notifications from that as well. Otherwise, you'll need to be connected to the network, obviously, to be able to pull stuff from there. That's not all, though. There's kind of a broad smattering of a number of other things as well that don't fall into specific buckets. The SharePoint Home. So if you're familiar with this from the Office 365 point of view, it's a place that rolls up recent documents, news from all your different sites and such. If you're running hybrid where you've got on-premise and cloud together, that cloud-based SharePoint Home will be a single home, and it'll roll up content from both on-premise and from the cloud. We'll see a modern search experience. Unfortunately, just like online, we can't do a lot of customizations on that just yet. We're waiting for more from Microsoft around custom refiners and things like that. But the out-of-the-box modern search experience is still a very nice experience that way. Authenticated SMTP, I mean, this is more for your IT pros. It's been a challenge in the past where you had to set up relays for SharePoint because it could only anonymously send emails out. So now you can simplify your SMTP mail configuration for that. Pound and percent in file and folder names. This was a goal of the engineering team to support all file names regardless of characters in SharePoint. And they've done this just recently in SharePoint Online, and they're now bringing that to SharePoint On-Premises as well. So if you've got a big migration, say from file shares, and maybe you've got file names that have percents or have pound symbols in them, that was always a challenge. Those files would fail to upload, or you'd have to use migration tools to address and look for that and correct those file and folder names. No longer an issue anymore. They've increased the URL path. I believe it was 256 characters before, it's 400 now. The recycle bin, it's kind of a neat concept that not just administrators but other general users can see content that another user has deleted and recover it. So if you're working on a document, somebody thinks it's not important and deletes it on you, you have the ability to look into the recycle bin, see it, pull it back, and continue working on it from there. Maybe drop a message to the person that deleted it on you. This was one that was debated a bit internally. They called it an N-2 upgrade. Can we go from SharePoint 2013 directly to SharePoint 2019? And they considered it. The engineering team looked at it, and they didn't have the bandwidth and cycles to get it in for the 2019 release path. So unfortunately, the only direct upgrade path is from SharePoint 2016. It doesn't mean that you can't, build an intermediate farm. We've done this for clients moving from SharePoint 2010 to 2016, for example, where we build a temporary 2013 farm just to attach the database, let it go through its upgrade process, and then back it up again and attach it to SharePoint 2016. You could do the same thing, even through 3 hops from 2010 all the way to 2019 if you wanted to from that point of view. Or you could use third-party products. It'd be a simpler approach. We're a big fan of ShareGate, so using ShareGate, say, to go directly even back to 2003 or 2007, right up into 2019, skipping right ahead from that point of view. If you've got a lot of workflows in place, good news is SharePoint 2013 workflows are still supported. So if you've got an investment in there, you don't need to recreate those workflows. They'll run fine on SharePoint 2019. There is a new SharePoint Workflow Manager for on-premises. Probably the bigger push, as all things are cloud from Microsoft's point of view, though, is on the Power Apps and Flow integration side of things. So you can use the on-premises data gateway and allow Flow and Power Apps that are running in the cloud access into your on-premises SharePoint 2019 and interact from that point of view. If you are doing a hybrid setup where you're running on-premises and cloud, they've made it simpler from an install point of view. At the end of the installation process, there's literally a one-click step to say, hey, I want to set this up with this online tenant and make those connections from there. In terms of what you need from an infrastructure point of view, so SharePoint 2019 is going to support either Windows Server 2016 or Server 2019, and also either SQL Server 2016 or 2017. They've gotten rid of the IIS-6 dependencies, so they've cleaned up things from an IIS infrastructure point of view. They did actually still leave in InfoPath form services support as well. So if you've got legacy InfoPath forms there, it's not dead yet. It's still there, and you can still support that from a SharePoint 2019 point of view. So that's a rapid fire scan through what's coming down the pipe from SharePoint 2019. I didn't put a slide in here. I probably should have from a timeline point of view. The TAP program, the Technical Adoption Program, is happening right now. We're part of that, so we're starting to kick the tires ourselves on SharePoint 2019. That's a private invitation only. It's probably not open anymore for new invitations, but the public preview is going to be happening this summer. So we're only a month, 2 months away from actually seeing a public beta of SharePoint 2019. Beyond that, there's a commitment to launch the product prior to the end of calendar 2018. So, whether that's Ignite in the fall or later out into the fall from there, we'll see what the timing is from that point of view. So what I thought I'd do now is just take a minute. I'm always curious who's using what from a SharePoint point of view. So I'm going to open up a couple polls here. Let me just have a peek at this here and launch this out. You may be running multiple environments, so feel free to check off more than one checkbox here. Whether you're using Cloud, Office 365, you've got an on-premises 2016, 2013, 2010, all the way back to 2007. I didn't put 2001, 2003 in there, but we actually had a client come to us quite recently about a 2003 upgrade project, so that stuff is still running out there. Let me give you another 10-15 seconds, get the last people to vote there, and I'll actually share the results back out so that everybody can see what's the cross spectrum of the audience that we have here. Okay. So let me share that out. Fair number on SharePoint Server 2016, so about a third of the audience on 2016, pretty evenly split between 365 and 2013, sort of 2/3 on each of those, and about 1/3 on 2010. So obviously a lot of people running hybrid because the numbers are well above 100%. Interesting to see people running both 365 and older versions of SharePoint, whether that's a transitional as you're migrating things across, or there's content that's just not cloud appropriate that you're planning on keeping on premises. So I've got one more poll that I want to share out here. So let me just hide that. Pull the next one up. So regardless of a version of SharePoint that you're running, I'm curious how you're using SharePoint today. Is it strictly from an internal collaboration point of view? Do you have your intranet running on SharePoint, which is obviously a very common scenario for a lot of clients on SharePoint. It's, I believe, the #1 platform from a intranet perspective. Are you running an Extranet today on your on-premises SharePoint, or in the cloud in Office 365? Or are you actually running a public-facing website where you've got anonymous users coming into your SharePoint environment? So again, I'll give another 10-15 seconds, get the last couple of votes in there, and then we'll share that back with everybody. All right. So almost everybody's using it from an internal collaboration point of view and from an internet point of view. Awesome to see. So, it's a great collaborative workspace. It's a great place to provide communications and broad publishing out to your organization for both those workloads. Not surprisingly, because we're going to be talking about extranets, about half of you using it today from an extranet's point of view. Hoping you'll learn something new and ways you can even improve on what you're doing for that. For the other half that aren't there today, hopefully open up some ideas in terms of how you could apply that going forward. A few from a public-facing website, we're seeing less and less of that, although we've got some interesting scenarios, some past webinars we've done where we actually use Office 365 as a content management system and then publish that over into an Azure website. It's kind of a different take on it, but gives you all the benefits of the content authors being able to use a familiar platform to create their content and then serve it up in the cloud in Azure. Okay, let me hide this out here, and we'll just get through these 2 slides. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about a SharePoint on-premises extranet, what that looks like. So you could have an existing SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016. Haven't got into the deep weeds on the authentication around 2019. My understanding, though, is that it's the same as it has been for the last 3 versions as well. They changed the authentication in 2010, and then it stayed consistent since then. So if you've got that existing infrastructure in place, or you're planning to build out a 2019 infrastructure, how do you leverage that? Most organizations have some sort of need to publish or collaborate with external users, and the nice thing about the SharePoint on-premises scenario is the licensing is actually quite simple from that point of view. In fact, let me bring up the SharePoint 2013 licensing. I know it's a little ways back, but this is the point that licensing changed. Prior to this, there was an internet sites license that you had to buy. When 2013 came out, they got rid of that, and they basically said for external users, you know what, all you need to do is license your server itself. You don't need to buy CALs for any of your external users, whether that's a secured extranet site or it's a public-facing internet site. The only people that need CALs is any internal users that are either coming into the internet or the extranet. In fact, if you're using it purely for an anonymous public-facing website, even your internal users don't need CALs, although typically they would, because they'd probably be doing some other internet work there as well. Now, you also require SQL Server and Windows Server licenses for your servers as well, and you need to be careful about what your definition is of an external user. There's the obvious case of employees, who are not external users, but sometimes there's gray zones. Maybe you're a franchise organization. What about the staff of your franchisees that don't actually work for you as a corporate entity? That's an area where Microsoft Legal tends to weigh in and say, well, those are not really arm's length. They should have CALs from that point of view. But if we're talking about external vendors or partners or donors, customers, those are clearly external people, no licensing required from that point of view. So the nice thing with the on-premise is we've got a lot of flexibility around the authentication side of things. So traditional SharePoint authentication, if you're just using it for internal purposes, is just to use Windows authentication. So you sign into your computer, you hit your SharePoint site, you don't see a login prompt. The pass-through authentication just happens with your Windows auth, and you're into your SharePoint site from there. Earlier versions of Extranet User Manager, we used what's called forms-based authentication. So we would actually install our product right into the SharePoint farm, and when somebody needed to authenticate, it would bring up an HTML form that they would enter their username and password and log into the site from there. That caused some challenges. It was fairly heavy touch on the installation into the SharePoint farm itself. So when we brought out the Office 365 version about 3-4 years ago, we switched to a federation model where we become basically what's called a trusted identity provider to SharePoint. So it's a very easy install. You're just running a line of PowerShell and installing a certificate into your farm. So you're not actually putting our product into the SharePoint farm. It can live on its own IIS server. It can be up in the cloud in Azure. It's very flexible from that point of view and very light touch from a SharePoint point of view. That gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of how we then integrate in. So why would you want to use Extranet User Manager on top of your SharePoint On Premises? So here's sort of some high level, we'll get into more feature sets a little bit later. So as I mentioned, Extranet User Manager acts as the identity provider. So when you hit SharePoint and you're not logged in, SharePoint redirects over to our products login page, you log in there, and then you're back into SharePoint. The nice thing is that actually provides single sign-on as well. So you've got other, maybe Azure websites, SaaS applications, portals, custom apps that you've built, they can all leverage that as well, because it's not a pure SharePoint solution. It's using OpenID Connect or SAML and WS Federation. So these are industry standard methods of providing secure single sign-on. There's no forms-based authentication as part of that. If you need registration, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Fully branded registration that you can customize, you can brand the login experience. Credentials are always a challenge, so providing a self-service forgotten password reset, or saying, you know what, let's forget about passwords and let's just do social integration. So let your external users use their Google, their Facebook, their Microsoft accounts to come in from that point of view. Currently supporting SharePoint 2010, 13, and 16, and planning very shortly to announce support for 2019 as well. So let's actually take a step back from the technology for a minute here, and let's just talk more about Extranet from a business point of view. And as we're talking with organizations, these are 5 considerations that we kind of walk our potential clients through in terms of what their Extranet would look like. The first question always is, who's going to be accessing the Extranet? Is it for members? Is it vendors, customers, suppliers? There's a lot of different scenarios. And for one organization, it may not just be one of these bullets. It could be several of those. You might have a board of directors portal, as well as a research portal, as well as a vendor portal. You could leverage the same SharePoint farm for all of that, a single instance of Extranet User Manager for all of that, and use groups and roles to properly manage permissions into the different areas from there. And also, is there some sort of member database? Maybe this is for customers or members where you want to track that in Salesforce or Dynamics CRM. Building those points of integration is something that we can certainly talk about as well. The next question is very important. Is there going to be a self-registration option? Are there users out there who are not known to you that are going to discover your service, register, and come through some sort of approval? Or is it invitation only? You know who you need to collaborate with, you just need to send invites out to those people. So the invitation only tends to be a smaller known set of users. It doesn't have to be centrally managed though. The product is all about delegation to say, okay, each business group that knows their people they need to invite, let them manage those invitations themselves. Likewise, from a self-registration, you may be onboarding hundreds or even thousands of external users. You probably want some approval workflows in that. And again, those approvals don't need to come to a central IT group. They could be delegated out to different groups within the organization. Or even external, you could actually do delegation to those external parties that you're going to be collaborating with. You'd have auto approvals on certain rules and delegation around that. How are your Extranet users going to authenticate? Common scenario that we've been supporting since the beginning of the product is email and password with some sort of self-service password reset. But there's a social option as well. Maybe you want people to come in with their Microsoft account, which could be a personal Hotmail account, but it also could be an Azure AD account. For a partner that's, say, using Office 365 themselves. They could use their own 365 credentials to come into your on-premise SharePoint 2019 farm from there, or Google or Facebook. Now, it depends on the style of Extranet that you're building. If it's more consumer or general public facing, the consumer social account integration makes a lot more sense. If it's business to business, maybe allowing people to sign in with their Facebook or their Google accounts not appropriate. It really depends on your scenario through there. The fourth is what sort of interactions those external users are going to have. Is it strictly a push model where you've got some published content that they need to be able to access? Or are they actually going to come in and collaborate with you on specific documents? They need to access team or project sites. What is that going to look like? And then the fifth point, what applications will be accessible? Is it just your on-premises SharePoint? Do you have some third-party SaaS applications or some custom applications that you built yourself? What sort of authentication models do they support? Can they easily integrate in from say, an OpenID Connect point of view, which is the more modern way of providing that integration that we support? So that's some backstory to think about as you're planning your extranet out. Let's dive into feature sets of our product itself and talk about how it addresses some of those points. So there's two sides to our product. There's what we call the end user components and the admin components. So the end user components are what your external users are going to see. So it starts with your registration, your profile page, setting your password, changing or resetting a forgotten password, are all end user components through there. So we provide a portal, or you can actually embed these components right into your site. You could embed them into your SharePoint site or into your custom application. Same thing from an administration point of view. We provide an application for that, or you could actually embed components of these into your site itself, which we've done with a number of our clients. But the big idea here is that delegation is very important, that we want it to be accessible to the business owners and even potentially the external users themselves to manage who those external users are. So you can search, add, edit, import both users and groups. So there's a big groups concept in the product, the idea being that you make users members of groups and then you assign permissions, say in SharePoint, to those groups. So there's also some pure IT configuration settings where you can set up the OpenID Connect and WS Federation, tailor any of the email templates to get your branding and messaging correct in there, configure access into 365 or Azure AD B2B if you're going to be using those as well. It is fully branded, and this is very important to our clients, that they see their brand through the entire experience, right from login form through registration to any emails that they receive, to any points of contact that they have through that. So you have full control around the branding through that. I've already mentioned this a couple of times, the idea of delegation. It's very important that IT doesn't become a gatekeeper here, that the business or even the external organizations can manage those users. Single sign-on I mentioned as well. As long as your application supports OpenID Connect or WS Fed, we can then interact and act as an identity provider for your application and provide single sign-on across that. We do support multi-factor authentication, so we do a second factor either through email or SMS. So when somebody logs in, we've got a rules engine that checks and says, hey, does this require a second factor authentication? Maybe you want to look for things like a new device or a new IP address or somebody that failed a previous login attempt and such, and trigger the second factor authentication, which can either send an email or an SMS text message out, get a code back to enter into the login process. Once you've successfully completed that, you're into SharePoint from there. We actually leverage this same functionality from an email revalidation perspective as well. This is an important thing. When you've brought a user into your extranet, and they're authenticating based on their email address that they registered with and their password. How do you know that that person still works for that organization? It might be a year after they registered, they may no longer work there, but as long as they remember their credentials into your extranet, they're still going to have access. So we can put in rules to say, hey, every 30 days, 60 days, whatever frequency you want, do an email revalidation. What that means is when somebody goes to log in, they get the login form, and it's very much like the multi-factor, except it's strictly through email. It says, hey, I'm going to send a code by email as part of the login process. I need you to prove that you still have access to that email address so you can enter in that code before I'm going to let you into our extranet. So it's a great way to confirm that those people are still with those organizations. Or home realm discovery. This is all about making it easy for internal users to come in and not see a login form. That's really the goal, that when somebody hits the login page and we detect that they're coming from an internal IP address, and you maintain the list of those addresses through the configuration pages in the admin console, it's going to take you straight through Windows Auth or ADFS, however you set up your SharePoint from there. So they never see the EUM login page. If they're outside, we don't actually know. We're going to need to bring up the login form, but we can still check to say, hey, are they coming from an internal email domain? Or maybe we've got a staff login button on there that they press, that we still go through that same path. Otherwise, you must be an external user. I need your email address and your password. Go through the login process from there. So it looks a little complicated, but the whole idea is to actually make it very simple from a above the hood point of view. Self-registration is very important for a lot of our clients. So having a fully customizable registration experience is important here. And we've actually significantly changed how this registration form is now built. So the entire EUM product has an API that's accessible to you as a developer under the hood. And if you want to customize things like the registration form here, you can actually do that just by editing the HTML of the form itself, which is how it makes it easy to also embed this right into your SharePoint pages if you want to as well. Forgotten password, if you're going to require users to maintain their credentials, you don't want them bugging you if they can't remember those credentials. And it's a very common scenario in an extranet because you may go for months or months without signing into that extranet. You just don't remember what password you used for it. So we want to make that easy through self-service. Enter in your email address, get an email with a secure token, one-time use, time expiring, click the link, set your new password, away you go. So we never ever send the password out. In fact, we don't want anybody to ever see or know the password other than the external user themselves. So as an administrator, you don't have access to the external user's passwords. They're one-way encrypted, stored in the database, or stored in Active Directory under the hood. Currently works with SharePoint 2010, 13, 16. Like I said, looking to announce support for 2019 as we get to the public preview as well. And it doesn't actually need to be installed on the SharePoint server. Now, as I mentioned, there's a PowerShell script that sets up the trust. That's really the only point of interaction to the server itself. It's fully adaptive design, both the end user and the admin pages. So whether you're on a smartphone, a tablet, a desktop, it's going to morph and adapt appropriately to the form factor of the device that you're on. You can install it in an on-premises server. You can put it right on the SharePoint server if you want to. We generally recommend having a separate server just to keep the mantra of one server, one application idea from that point of view. If you upgrade your SharePoint later, you don't need to touch the server that's got the EUM on it. You could host it in your own Azure tenant. You don't need a VM for that. You can actually put it up in an app service, which is a very cost-effective, highly available way to provide it. Or we can host it in our own Azure tenant on your behalf. So what's all this cost? We actually just recently at the SharePoint conference the week before last announced a new pricing model. Previously we had just a standard in enterprise. We had a light, but we didn't promote it. We've now formalized that and we have the 3 publicly available versions of the product. So there's kind of 2 ways that you look at which version you need to go into. One is the number of external users that are coming in. If it's less than 250, you're in a light version. If it's between 250 and 5,000, standard. If you're over 5,000, enterprise. But there is feature set differences between those as well. So if you have a look at the pricing page on our site here, let me just bring that up for us for a second here. You'll see all the different versions here, and it actually lays out very clearly what things you have on each of them through there. The thing to remember, the light version is really targeted for SharePoint Online, not on premises. So from a SharePoint on premises point of view, we're really looking at either the standard or the enterprise version of the product. The reason for that is the light version doesn't actually do any of the login process. We let Microsoft take care of that through their login form. So we're not providing the identity provider, we're just providing the layer on top of Azure B2B to manage those users. All right. Let's take some time. We're a little past the halfway mark here now, and let's actually go through some scenarios. So I'm actually going to use our on-premises SharePoint 2016 and walk you through a demo. These links are actually live and available, so if you're curious, you can actually hit that sp2016.eumdemo.com. You'll bring up our SharePoint site. Let me just have a look at that site right now here. So I'm actually going to run a couple different browser windows here. So I've got the pricing one, I've got my EUM admin console. So this is logged in as an administrator right now. And then I've got one more tab. Where am I here? Too many windows going. Let me open a new incognito window, put that over the side, and let's go to that SharePoint 2016 site. So sp2016.eumdemo.com. This site is published out to the internet through our web application proxy, which is a feature of Windows Server 2012. We're actually planning on changing that to some Azure stuff shortly. But what we've done is we made the top site publicly available. So you can see here I've got a sign-in link. I'm not currently signed into SharePoint. So this is available to anybody. You can bring that up. If I want to access the private site, though, it's going to want credentials for me. So let's go ahead and hit that. And you'll see that I've changed to a different URL here. Now I'm on login.eumdemo.com. SharePoint said, hey, I don't know who you are. I'm going to fire you over to the identity provider, which happens to be Extranet User Manager, and log you in there. Actually, my session timed out over here. Let me just refresh that. One of the things I often do as I'm doing my demos, I use a lot of different accounts. Let's just do a quick check over here and make sure that I've got the next available demo slot to use. So if I do a search for Peter, which is what I make all my demo accounts, we see I've got a pcarson1, pcarson2. Let's actually use pcarson3. So I'm on the login screen on the left here as a new user. I can't sign in yet because I don't have an account. So I'm going to click on this register link and create my new account. So let me go ahead and do that. Right now we've got it set up just for email and password. We could add support for Facebook and Google and Microsoft to that as well. But let's go through. I'll put in my information. And we'll make this one Peter Carson 3. We'll get very creative with our numbering. So that's really all that I need to enter in is a name and an email address. And you can define on your registration form what other fields you want to capture. And as I mentioned, it's very easy just through some HTML changes to add or remove fields to that. We have a CAPTCHA, a Google reCAPTCHA in here as well. You don't have to have that on, but it's nice to prevent spam attacks from automated bots and such filling in your registration form. We've got the new style CAPTCHA. I've got to go through. We'll see how many passes. I did a trial run this morning. It took me through 4 different passes, only 2 on that one to say I'm not a robot, and I can go ahead and register. So we've set up this particular site to require approval because we want to take you through from a demo point of view what that approval process looks like. It could do an auto approval and just go ahead and create your account. So if I research over here, we see I've got my pcarson3 at envisionit365.com, and it's currently in a pending approval state. What that means is that it exists as a record in the Extranet User Manager product, but there's no identity associated with it. There's no way for somebody to log in with that account yet because it hasn't gone through the approval process yet. So there's a couple of emails that should have come through from that. Let me have a look here. There we go. So our first one is to me, the person registering, saying, hey, thanks for requesting an account. You're going to have to wait till your account gets approved and you'll receive another email with instructions to set your password. So that's pretty self-explanatory. In fact, if we want to customize this, if I can come over to my email configuration, I can choose that pending approval email template, and we'll see that same email that I just got through there. And there's actually tokens that you can insert to put names and placeholders in from a mail merge point of view, add your own images, copy, style, and such through that. So you've got full customization around all the emails that come through. Now, a second email came at the same time, not to me as the person registering, but me as the business owner saying, hey, somebody just signed up on the site. They're pending approval right now for this fellow named Peter Carson 3. You need to edit their record. So let me just copy that hyperlink. I want to put it in the right window here. And I'll paste it in over here. So here I see very much the same fields that I saw in the registration. Actually, we've got more fields in here. We can actually have fields that aren't visible to the end user, but are available to you to better manage people through there. So we can see that the status of this user is pending approval. I'm going to need to switch them to active to light up their account. Now they're going to need some access into the SharePoint site as well. So let me add them into a group here. So we've got one called SharePoint 2016 Private, and I'll show you in a minute the permissions that drive that that let us in there. So let's go ahead and update that record. So this is now queuing up a welcome email to the person that just registered. Say, hey, you're all approved, you're ready to go. Here's a link to set your new password. So let's get rid of this one here. Bring up our welcome email. There we go. And this is the important link here. You've got until this time tomorrow, and you can define that. If we come over here to our configuration, again for email, and we pull up the welcome email, oh, wait a minute, we don't have it on this page yet. Oh no, there it is. Token expiry. So that's the time in minutes, which that equates to 1 day. So you can define how long you want that set password link to be available for. You want it fairly long because when you do a forgotten password, the person's waiting for that email and going to take action on it right away. When they register, there may be a delay before they get approved. They may not be at their email when this comes back to them. So you want to give them a fair chunk of time, at least a day, sometimes longer than that, for them to be able to set their password. Let's copy that hyperlink. Let's paste it over on the end user page here. And here I can decide, do I want to link my account up with Google or Facebook? But let's keep going through the password scenario. So you get to define what your rules are for password size and complexity. So we've said, okay, it needs to begin with a letter or a number. It's got to be complex. We've need at least one uppercase letter, lowercase, and a number between these characters and length. And obviously they need to match. So live as I'm typing, as I start to type, the first letter says, hey, that begins with a letter or a number, that's good, but you're still wrong on these ones here. So it kind of coaches people through. Now I've got all those satisfied. Actually, that was the wrong one. Let's use this one here. Now I just need to type the same thing in. There we go. We're green on all checks. I can go ahead and set my password. And boom, I'm set and ready to go. So I haven't actually logged in yet. I've just set my password. We can change the messaging on this screen here. We use this demo environment for both online as well as SharePoint On Premises. So we haven't done that on this one. But let's go back to the home page here. So like I mentioned, it's going to require me to log in. So let's use those credentials that I just entered. So the email address that I registered with and the password that I just set. And go ahead and log in. All right, so we're now in the end user pages here. So I can do things like come to my profile page. I can see the profile that I entered in. I could update that. We do support changing the email address that you log in with. A lot of our clients don't want that. Like I mentioned, that scenario where somebody leaves the organization, you don't want them changing their email to their personal Gmail as they leave. So that often gets locked down. But that's entirely up to you whether you want to support that or not. I can come in and change my password. So if I feel a need to, my password's potentially being compromised and it's a shared one I use across multiple systems, I got to come into this one and change it. Just put in my old, double enter my new, same rules apply, away you go from there. We've also put some links into the SharePoint On-Premise and into the Office 365. Let's go ahead and click on the SharePoint On-Premise. Now remember when we were at SharePoint before, in fact, let me just open this up in another tab for a second. We weren't actually signed in. Now when I look at this link here, it's a little hard to see, but it's going to a /private site that does require sign-in. So when I click on that, you notice that it didn't actually bring up a sign-in form because I'd already signed in to Extranet User Manager and the single sign-on just took me right into SharePoint. So that's the experience going into multiple different applications. It's seamless once you've signed into one. I've now signed in as pcarson3 on this one here, and away I go from there. Now, as I mentioned before, we could actually embed a lot of those pages right in the SharePoint site itself. It's just a matter of embedding some HTML and JavaScript, and then it talks back to the EUM APIs from there. In our case, we've left it just as links and such. We want to showcase the product and show that, but I can show you some client scenarios where we've done that. So I can jump into different areas. I can go back to the private site, away I go from there. So let's say I've had some challenges signing in. So let's actually come back to my home site here. I say I want to sign out. I just want to take us through the login process again. So if for some reason I'm having some trouble accessing my account, we used to call this forgot my password, but because we've got the social integration, it may not be your password that you're having problems with. It could be your social integration. Click this link here, just type in my email address, hit enter, and it's now sending out a forgotten password email, which again, you can customize the look and feel through here, but let's actually just bring that email up. So it looks very much like the welcome email. It's got a link to reset your password. We can see we've got a different time range on it here. We've actually set that to be a 2-hour window rather than a 1-day window. Like I mentioned, forgotten password tends to be acted on right away. You don't need to set a long window from that. And then you can use this as triggers for things like the multi-factor as well to say, okay, I need to send this person an SMS text message after they log in because they just did a password reset. I need to confirm doubly that they are really who they say they are from that perspective. So you can get more sophisticated from your verification and authentication point of view. Okay, so we've kind of toured through the end user side of it. Let's talk a bit more about the administration side of it. So I showed you the search user. You know, we can bring up a particular set of users through here. I can click on one there like the Peter Carson 3 and say I want to edit this user, see all their details. Maybe I want to deactivate them because they're no longer supposed to be coming into the portal. We still retain that record in here though. We don't actually delete them out, we just set them as a deactive state. We remove their identity record, they're not able to log in through there. The key there is that we're tracking all this from an audit point of view. So every time somebody registers, someone approves them, changes their status, puts them in a group, takes them out of a group, all those actions are being tracked in our SQL database under the hood. So if you need to, you can go back and audit that full history of what's happened with each of those external users, or even who's been doing what from an internal point of view. So very powerful from that perspective. Now you remember we put this user into this SharePoint 2016 private group, so we can look at the perspective of an individual user and what groups they belong to. We can also take it the other approach as well and say, well, let's bring up that SharePoint 2016 group right here, and we can see all the different members that are in that group. I could take somebody out of the group as well. Now you notice here there's this concept of owners. And this is a very key concept in Extranet User Manager. So when you make somebody an owner of a group, whether they're an internal user or an external user, it means that they get to manage the membership of the group. They don't get to edit the group as a whole, they just get to change the membership within it. So if I was logged in as a group owner in here, all I would see is this user section here. I wouldn't see the groups and I wouldn't see the settings. So I'd be able to search and add users. I could even bulk import users. So if I've got an Excel file, say of 100 users I want to bring in, I'd be able to import them. They'd all get their welcome emails. They'd all be part of my group. And then they'd be able to do whatever that group had its permissions assigned to them with. So in fact, if I come over to my SharePoint 2016 for a minute here, go ahead and sign in here. Oh, this user doesn't have permissions to change things in here, but the way we set it up is this particular private site has been configured that you need to be a member of this, of that SP2016 group in order to have access to that site. So once you've baked those permissions in SharePoint, you don't really need to touch them. And the people that are managing users don't even need permissions right in SharePoint, which is really important from a governance point of view. You generally don't want to allow all of your users to start changing permissions and breaking inheritance in SharePoint. It can get pretty messy. So this way you can set it up, leave it, and all they need to do is manage who are going to be coming into their groups from there. You know, that's one security level is the group owner that just sees these options here. You can also have what's called a group editor role that basically sees the users and the groups. They don't have the options to change things like email templates and client configurations because that's more of an IT function, but they have the ability to add and import and search groups through there as well. So you can have multiple different levels of users, and those users can be both internal and external to your system. So let me come back to the PowerPoint for a minute here. There's a couple of client scenarios that I wanted to take you through. These links will be available in the deck. You can have a look yourself. It just gives you a sense of some different ways that EUM gets used in client implementations. The first one here is for Ontario MD. Oops. Sometimes from PowerPoint, they don't like to link across properly. So let's actually just bring up the tab. And let's actually full screen this. There we go, that looks a little better. So this is actually an interesting site. It's actually built in Office 365 from a content authoring point of view, and it's an example of one of the ones where we then publish that as an Azure website. So this actually isn't SharePoint, but we have integrated Extranet User Manager into it. So when I do a sign in or a register through here, we're going to see the branded versions of those Extranet User Manager pages coming through that interface. The model here is quite interesting because Ontario MD is a not-for-profit government-funded organization that provides adoption services around electronic medical record systems for physicians in the province of Ontario. That was a mouthful, I apologize. Basically, people that are registering are going to be licensed physicians in the province. So we need to interface in with the sister agency, the Ontario Medical Agency, to make sure that the physicians that are registering are actually properly licensed physicians. They verify, they go through that. Once they create their account, they actually become group owners of their own group, and they can then invite in their administrative staff, their nursing staff as part of it. One of the first things they do is typically invite their office administrator in and delegate them to be an owner as well, and then that office administrator can set everybody else up within that practice. So it's a very organic way of building that out. We started with about 14,000 previous users from the system that we replaced a year ago when we went live. We're up over 20,000 users in this right now. So product scales to large numbers of users as part of that. Public Health Ontario, let me see here. This is actually still a SharePoint 2010 farm that this is running on, so a little bit older technology-wise, but still works the same way. Here we're mainly responsible for the registration side of things. Apparently their site needs a little warm-up script or something going on. It's taking a minute to come up there. You know what, let me grab the next one while we're going through here. Oh, there we go. So, you know, I can see the registration form through here, go through that registration process. Again, there's an immediate auto approval, and then there's groups for elevated users like public health professionals that then get broader access into the site from there. OCAS is the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. So they're an umbrella organization, about 60, 65 people, so it's not a big group within the full-time employees of OCAS, but they oversee about 8,000 staff and volunteers of the member children's aid societies across the province. So this is actually an Office 365 site. We're providing the login experience through that. We can see the self-registration. This one's interesting because if you say you belong to, say, the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, and you enter in an email with the CAST email domain on it, it'll auto-approve your account. It says, hey, you obviously work for one of our member associations because you need to receive this email in order to complete the process. We're just going to auto-approve you in. So a year and a half ago when they were really ramping up on this one, they had a major funding initiative and training initiative they were doing. They were onboarding approximately 500 net new users per day through this system. So, you know, getting that, again, large-scale onboarding is something we can definitely support through there. There's a couple others you can have a look through here. The G2D Marketplace is a municipal government site. It's an interesting one because it's a marketplace where you can purchase pre-approved vendor products, one of which is Extranet User Manager, but the marketplace itself is provided through Extranet User Manager. So it's both the front door and one of the things that you can purchase through it. It's basically providing, you know, pre-approved IT solutions to municipal governments throughout the US. Avari is an advisors portal for insurance advisors. CAMH is a problem gambling, so treatment professionals, researchers working in that field coming into the site from there. So those are just a few examples of different sites. Like I mentioned, we've got lots of different clients through there. So that's it for my presentation. Wanted to thank everybody. I don't know if we had some questions coming through there. Logan, if you want to jump on the line, feel free. I'm happy to answer those, or we can certainly follow up afterwards. So as I mentioned, we're going to send a copy of the deck out. We'll post up a recording of the video. If you've got colleagues who weren't able to join and want to be able to review the content, by all means, we encourage that. And love to have a deeper discussion with you to see how we could help you with your extranet needs, as well as your SharePoint On Premises and Office 365 plans. So with that, I want to thank everybody again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, bye.